Welcome to Grown Sexy Sistahs Talk. This is real conversation for real women about real life. I'm your host, NiseyGail, and I am a personal development and life coach, women's empowerment specialist, and your number one Fierce Sistah. This is episode number 7 and the 4th episode in the Get Your Mind Right series. Today, we're talking again to Dr. Tonya Featherston, the Happy Doctor, about strategies to keep past baggage from affecting our lives today. Dr. Tanya is an educational psychologist with a passion for improving lives. She advocates for social and emotional wellness and is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Social Emotional Wellness in Baltimore. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this 4th episode in the Get Your Mind Right series. And please support the Grown Sexy Sistahs Talk podcast on Podbean. Much love, be blessed, and stay Grown Sexy Sistahs. We'll speak soon. All right, so welcome to Grown and Sexy Sistahs Talk. This is real conversation for real women about real life. And I'm so excited to have on the line with me again, Dr. Tonya Featherston, the Happy Doctor. You always like it when I say that, right?
Yes, it sounds just fabulous when you say the Happy Doctor. I mean, who would want to be the Happy Doctor?
We all need a happy doctor in our lives.
We do. It just makes you smile. So yes, everybody should get one if you don't have one already. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to do this again with you.
That's great. And so we talked to Dr. Tanya a couple weeks ago, and now we're back on the line with her again. The last time we talked about a little bit about stress management and things like that, but this time we want to go a little bit deeper, and we want to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart and something that I found out the hard way, and that's how, having past traumatic experiences can come up in your future and cause problems. Mm-hmm. So we haven't figured out what we're going to name it yet, but it's something to the effect of how past trauma is affecting your life today.
That sounds like the
is that fair?
Title to me. Yep, that sounds like the perfect title.
All right, so Dr. Tanya, for those people who did not listen to the last podcast and get to know you a little bit, tell us a little bit about your practice and how it differs from other psychologists.
Okay. So I am an educational psychologist, and it's a little different in the sense most of the time when people think about psychologists, they think only clinical usually. And so there are a range of different types of psychologists, some that work just in companies, some that do, clinical thing that we're familiar with, some that work specifically in educational institutions. So as an educational psychologist, we pretty much do the same thing in helping you to improve your lives. But we tend to do it from a perspective of not necessarily the kind of talk therapy that we're used to, but it is more on an educational side where we often run groups. So we'll do like psychoeducational groups. So it really has like a learning component to it where we are going to address any challenges and issues that you may have, but we tend to give you tools and strategies that you can go right away. So almost like I consider it to be kind of homework, really. Okay. Where we're going to give you tools and activities and things, strategies that you can walk away using to sort of improve whatever that challenge is that you have, whatever that situation is that you have in your life. So that's the kind of educational aspect of it, is that, we're going to teach you some things to be able to do to help with that issue.
Okay. And that's pretty neat, because before I met you, I had never heard of an educational psychologist. So that's a nice new perspective to bring to the sisters.
Yeah, it definitely is. I really gravitated towards it because I came from an educational background, being a teacher and a principal. And so just, in myself, having had therapy with people, I always wanted to know, almost as soon as I sat down, was just, what can I do about this? I wasn't interested in medication. I've never been interested in medication on any level, really.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to know, what can I do? What can you teach me to do to be able to improve my life? And so, as I started to experience it myself, I thought, well, this is a different way to look at psychology that really, again, it's about teaching you tools and strategies.
Yeah, I like that because I know a lot of doctors, they go straight to medicate.
Right. And sometimes it's needed. So, don't get me wrong with that there are times, but in a lot of times what will happen is that, I'm an advocate for, yes, get the medication if that's what you need, but then couple it with the strategies. Because then you do both things together. Then you have an even more powerful way of making change in your life, because sometimes it's not good for us to be on medication, for extremely long periods of time.
Right.
Sometimes it has all these negative and adverse side effects to it. And so you want to, while you are doing whatever medication, that's kind of leveling you out and helping with it, on that level, that you are learning some strategies and tools that you can use on your own, so that if you ever have to get off that medication, you still have those tools and strategies are always going to be with you.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So today we want to talk a little bit about how situations that happen in our past can affect our future behavior. So talk to us a little bit about that, and why is it so important for us to talk about this?
Okay. Today it's something that is really sort of showing itself in everywhere in popular media. We have a lot of things going on now with this Me Too movement, and a lot of people that have experienced different types of traumatic experiences throughout their lives, but have never said anything about it, have never talked about it, now are getting the courage to be able to come forth and actually say, hey, these things have happened to me as well, and looking to be able to get some assistance. So, when we talk about just who we are as people, I always say we are a collection of our past experiences and past events in our lives, and the effects that those experiences and events have had on us. That, if we look at it, you can't go through life without having experienced lots of different things. And so some of those things that we've experienced have had lingering effects on us. And sometimes in ways that we don't really know and we don't really recognize until someone brings that, to our attention, especially in the Black community. And because we're talking about, Black women specifically. Yeah. In the Black community, one of the things that for Black women that we've been taught to do is to just, to put it aside, put it on the shelf, get over it. Keep moving, keep it pushing, keep moving, all of those things. Right. And so because we as a culture don't really take the time to stop and deal with things when they happen to us, then it's just like the Erykah Badu song that I love so much, Bag Lady. That's what happens, is that all this stuff gets stuffed, all these experiences get stuffed in this bag. And the more you carry it, the heavier the bag becomes. And that bag eventually starts to impact our relationships with other people, our, how we work, our health. It starts to impact a lot of things if we don't ever stop and take the time to really deal with some of these things that have happened in our lives. So that's why I think it's such an important conversation to have, is because just, historically, as a group of people, we haven't done this. And for a lot of reasons, we haven't done it. And now I think it's time. I think it's coming a time, where people are feeling safe enough to be able to start to talk about some of the things that they've experienced.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's really important to me to have these conversations and have the podcast, because a lot of the things that, like you said, we accepted in the past are things that we know now that we have the ability to change if we know how to deal with it, we recognize it, and we know how to deal with it. So I like that you brought up the Erykah Badu, because I was thinking about that as I was thinking about what I would say when we talked. I started thinking about, wait a minute, this is the baggage, right? So people can understand, right? Because at first I was like, well, past trauma, it sounds so complicated, but this is the baggage. We all know what that means.
Yes, when you say trauma, most people want to run, out the door in the other direction. They're like, oh no, I'm not talking about that. I don't want to deal with that. And, I don't want anything to do with that. Yeah. But if you really, and I think the Bag Lady piece works perfectly, there's a workshop that I do called The Invisible Backpack. And so a lot of it is related to, working with children, but it's that same thing. it's that heavy bag that we're all carrying. It's that invisible bag that you take with you on a date. You know, that invisible bag that comes with you to every family event. It's that invisible bag that goes with you to work every day, you know, and we drag it around constantly.
Yeah.
And it impacts the decisions that we make. It impacts how we, you know, come off to other people sometimes.
Yes.
The decisions, you know, it just impacts everything in our lives. And sometimes we just don't recognize it.
Yeah. I like to call it, in my blog, I called it the angry Black woman syndrome, or like you said, the bag lady syndrome, right? It's like people as Black women, we have this stereotype of being angry all the time, but we don't know what's causing that, right? It's not that we just showed up and we just angry because today is a good day to be angry, but there's a lot of things that, you know, we have suppressed, and because we have the strong Black woman syndrome, then, you know, we have taken on this facade that we could just kind of deal with everything. We're strong. We got it. I got it. Don't worry. I got to hold it down. I'm a strong Black woman. I got this. I got this. I got this, until you don't got it no more.
Exactly. And it's that constant, I got this, that gets us into that place to where, because we've let so many things pile up.
Yeah.
And the thing with trauma is that it's not something that can't be overcome. It's not something that can't be dealt with, that you can't give yourself the tools and strategies that you need to be able to really process those things and really move past those things. But it's that accumulation that makes it even more difficult for you to be able to do anything with. Because if you, there, you know, are lots of studies that have taken place now where they've gone back as far as childhood to look at many of the things. So there's a study called the ACEs study, and ACEs just stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Okay. And so in this study, they studied adults, but, and it was, I think it was Kaiser insurance company that did the original study. And they were looking at sort of why some of the adults that they were seeing in the different practices were having so much high blood pressure, heart disease, you know, those kinds of things. And so they started to go backwards and said, well, okay, let's look at sort of their history and what's happened to them and kind of what things they've experienced. And so in doing this study, and I think it was like a 17-year study that they did, and doing this long-term study, when they went back, they realized that so many of those people who had those diseases, cancer being one of them as well, they realized that many of them had what they call these adverse childhood experiences, that they had experienced, I think most of them either 2 or more of these adverse childhood experiences. And the ACEs, it isn't anything except for trauma. Right. So throughout their childhood, they had experienced, whether it was physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, but sometimes things that we don't really consider to be trauma. Because when we think of trauma, we think of those kinds of things. Right. But these adverse childhood experiences or traumatic experiences that they had as children were things like the divorce of a parent. They were things like being the death of a parent, being raised or in a household with a parent that was suffering from a mental illness. Okay. It was those kinds of things that we don't really categorize those as trauma, but they really are. Right. You know, if you've experienced a lot of community violence, you know, that has a very traumatic effect on you, you know, in the long-term way, if you're experiencing those kinds of things over and over and over based on where it is that you live. Okay. So there's a lot of different things, even natural disasters. And this is one I always mention in workshops. Sometimes people don't think that those kinds of things are traumatic, but they are. You think about all the people who have gone through, you know, Hurricane Katrina, Harvey, Maria, all of those different natural disasters, that's very traumatic on a person. And that is going to have a long-term effect on you, or can have a long-term effect on you if you don't get some assistance in being able to deal with, you know, what happened to you during those things. And
I'm glad that was the next question. And you kind of touched on that, because I wanted to just kind of list out, like you just did, what are some of the things that could be problematic? Because when we say a past trauma, we're thinking about, trauma, like shock trauma, like, life or death situations.
Right.
But reality is that all the things you just listed can be traumatic. And so even as an adult, things that we may go through, like divorce.
Absolutely.
Or, any kind of a sexual assault, or can you just name some more things that
homelessness. Homelessness is considered, trauma. So even if it was, because some people say, well, I wasn't homeless that long, it was only for a couple of months, or but even if it was for a short period of time, then that could also, have a very traumatic effect on you and sort of how you think about things, how you process things, how you now make decisions, from that point forward. Again, there are, things when you're a child, things that have happened to you, bullying, for example, can be very traumatic. So again, you being treated, whether it was physical or whether it was an emotional type of abuse, that can be very traumatic as well. Having parents that are alcoholic parents can be very, traumatic for a person. Or if you're in a relationship with someone who is dealing with alcoholism and you've been in that relationship, for a long period of time, then that can be traumatic for you as well. Of course, things like domestic violence, those types of things, that's very traumatic for people.
Right.
So the list is, it's very long and it's very vast. And usually a lot of times when I do workshops and I list, and there's a long list of maybe close to 50 different things.
Wow.
That are on there. And after I go through the list and I ask people, if they're okay with it, if they have experienced any one of those things, raise their hand. And almost inevitably, with an audience of 200-300 people, I very often will maybe get one person who will raise their hand to say that they haven't experienced any of those things. It's overwhelmingly anywhere from 95 to 99% of the audience has experienced some of those things, that are on there. And so when you think about it, that makes trauma very real. Yeah. It makes trauma a very ordinary, everyday kind of occurrence when you think about it from that. And it's not that sort of really deep, dismal thing that's happened to someone. It's like, again, divorce, death of parents, or death of a very close, loved one in your family. Like, those things are everyday occurrences.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely personally went through like 5 of those things all at one time.
Exactly.
and my mom passed away, and I got separated and divorced, and my children with co-parenting, like all of those things happened at one time. But as a strong Black woman, it was, I got it. I'm going to keep pushing forward because, we don't have time to stop and deal with this stuff. We just got to keep pushing forward. But that's not the right answer because it comes back up later.
Exactly. And that's the type of thing that will lead you towards depression. Yeah. That will lead you towards, having high levels of anxiety and those kinds of things. And in the beginning, we don't see it because we're just like, okay, I could think of, a similar example when my father passed away. It was like, okay, I'm the one, they always tell me, I'm the one that keeps everybody else together. And again, I can remember my little sister saying, well, she calls me Yoda. And so she's like, Yoda, you can't fall apart. You're the one that keeps everybody else together. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this has been just as traumatic for me because it was so sudden. None of us expected it. And because of his age, he was still, quite young. And so, it shocked and surprised all of us. But even with that, it was like, okay, I need to keep myself together because now I have to plan a funeral. I have to make sure my mother's okay. I have to make sure, my sisters are okay, my nieces and nephews, all of that. And so we do jump into that mode. Yeah. And it was like right after that, it was like, okay, I have to get back to work. I got a job to do, and I need to do all the things that I need to do for that. And so it moves from one thing to another. And then later you may look up 2 or 3 years, later, and you're like, what's wrong with me? What's going on with me? And that's one of the questions that when you mentioned earlier about the the angry Black woman, syndrome and those kinds of things. It's like, now for everybody that's listening, the one thing I want everybody to remember is when you start to think now about people's behavior and why they do some of the things that they do, the question to ask is not why they're doing whatever it is that they're doing.
Right.
But the question, if you're going to have kind of a trauma-informed approach to things now, is to really say what happened to that person.
Yeah.
So the same thing with, the quote, angry Black woman, it's like, what's happened to her that's caused her to be so angry about so many things?
Right.
Same thing, with children. What's happened to them to cause them to behave the way that they're behaving? And if we start to ask that question, as opposed to what's wrong with you, why you acting crazy, why you do, that kind of thing, and you simply ask the question, what? I wonder what happened.
Yeah.
To that person. Yeah. That'll make you take a totally different perspective sometimes on a lot of our behavior.
Yeah, I like that. And after, if we continue to have these conversations and normalize this, then that would be the ultimate goal, right? Instead of being like, well, what's wrong with her? It's like, how can we help? There must be something that's going on, because like I said before, and I've said this in a couple of different podcasts, and I'm transparent about it, but I had gotten to a point where I felt like I was just angry all the time, all day, every day, for no reason. Right. And I liken it to spinning out of control, just like a little tornado. And I realized, after a while, that it couldn't be everybody else that had the problem. It had to have been something going on with me to keep me upset and frustrated and angry all the time. And that's when I started seeking out counseling, because I'm like, hold on, something's going on here. And if I don't fix it, then I'm literally in a dangerous place now, because I am like a ticking time bomb. But it was because of all these things had gone on, and I just kept pushing past it because, I don't have time to deal with it, until it got to a point where it was like explosive, and that's why I think it's important to bring this information to people, because surely I'm not the only one.
Right. And no, you're not, actually. And that's why I said, it's becoming a thing where it's not that random foreign person, that's had this horrible thing happen to them, but it's the majority of us. Yeah. So, it's every day, it's in your face. We walk by people, we live with people, we work with people all day, every day, who have had these traumatic experiences. And so many of us have never really dealt with those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good information. And I'm glad that we are making an effort to be able to recognize that, because I think that we would, like you said, give each other a little break if we understood half the stuff that other people have been through, like our coworkers and friends. Then we would be a lot easier on them and be more understanding when they are going through something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We definitely would.
All right. So now, how can past traumatic events show up in our lives? What's some of the ways we kind of act out?
Okay. So trauma can manifest itself in your life in a number of ways. Sometimes you see it in the relationships that you have with other people. Mm-hmm. So it can show up in your relationships that you have with coworkers, for example. Mm-hmm. So if I know people who, sometimes move from job to job to job, and it's always something wrong with that job. It's always something wrong with the people on that job. Yeah. And you think, okay, every job, like you've had 8 jobs and it's been 20 different people on all of these jobs. And there's been some issue, something with all of these jobs. And so sometimes it will show up in our workplace, because a lot of times, the workplace can be stressful. And so if it's baggage and trauma that you're carrying that you haven't dealt with, then when you get put in stressful situations, that's when it will really show up. Because, your body, especially if you've been a person who has experienced multiple traumas or multiples of those adverse childhood experiences that we talked about earlier, then sometimes you can get stuck in that fight or flight mode. Yeah. Where your body and your mind just reacts to things in sort of an extreme way. Yeah. And so that's another way that it shows up, is that, it sort of takes away at times our ability to sort of stop and pause and think rationally about things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're in that fight mode and you want to, somebody says something to you that might be a little bit out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And other people might kind of look at them and go, oh, okay, I can't believe you said something like that, or I'm just going to let that go and I'm just going to walk off. Well, if you have experienced multiple traumas, then your mind might instantly feel like that's a severe threat for you.
Yeah.
So it feels like you need to fight back. You need to attack because that person is on the attack at you.
Yeah.
And so, that's one way that it shows up, is that we can be, again, very quick to attack other people, very quick to respond to things in sort of extreme ways.
Okay.
So that's one way that you might see it. Other ways you might see it in your relationships that you have with, your significant other. Sometimes those traumas will show up in you not being able to get as close to a person as you would like to.
Okay.
Your sabotaging relationships. I've worked with a lot of people where things get going really well in a relationship and then they inevitably do something because they feel like something's going to happen.
Okay.
And so instead of waiting and just seeing, is anything really going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
You can trigger too quick and you make something happen because you just knew, that something was going to happen. And so again, it's that thinking. One of the things that trauma really does to us is it really alters the way we think about things. It alters the way we respond, to things. So, traumas like natural disasters, just think about, the hurricane and things like that people just went through recently.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things. If you were in those situations, then, it can make you really skittish about just normal rainstorms and things like that. It can make you skittish about, your ability to be able to survive and do the things that you need to do. So, again, it affects us in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall thing is it really usually changes the way you think about things,
Mm-hmm.
make decisions about things, and the types of relationships, how you're able to have sort of healthy relationships with people.
That makes a lot of sense. And I definitely can understand. And I guess we always we see situations where, people can get into relationships and then they have issues like over and over and over again. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's that baggage, is what we brought into it that we didn't deal with before. And so ideally, I guess, being, like we say, doing the work or being a whole person before you get into a relationship, would be ideal, because we do bring so much stuff from our past back into the relationships.
Right. And just being honest, I think really knowing yourself and knowing, because I think in dealing with so much of this stuff, it really starts with that idea of being reflective and being honest and mindful
Mm-hmm.
about these are the experiences that I've had.
Right.
Because, you can't really share and help anybody else understand you and why you respond a certain way, to certain things, if you haven't been honest with yourself about why you respond to it, to it in a certain way. So
Right.
It kind of starts with that self-reflection first to say, okay, why is it that whenever somebody, because sometimes with trauma, it can even be a smell. It can be a word that somebody uses, and it instantly triggers you and reminds you of, that past trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, you're going off about something, and it's because somebody said something a certain way that reminded you, of an experience that you had. And
Right.
so that's kind of where it all begins, is you got to understand you, and you've got to understand, okay, this is something, when you either do this or say this, or when I hear people, doing or saying a certain thing, this makes me feel a certain way. I feel unsafe,
Mm-hmm.
with this. This reminds me of this negative experience that I've had. And
Right.
so how do I respond to that? How do I do I really get out of control when there's really no need for me to do that?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that triggers me? And then how do I react to that? And then once you know that, then that's when you can start to, share with other people that you trust. That's when you can be able to make sure that you keep yourself in a safe space.
Right. Okay, that's good information. So now let me go back, because I know you have my fabricated questions here.
Okay, go ahead.
So is there a relationship between, or are we talking about PTSD, or is it some kind of correlation?
Mm-hmm. So yes, because PTSD is just a specific type of trauma.
Okay.
And so it's the disorder that goes with after, just like I said, we are sort of a culmination of those experiences and events, and then the effects that they've had on us.
Right.
So when you think of, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's the disorder that you get when you can't, when you keep reliving basically that traumatic event or that traumatic experience over and over and over again. And so, you get people who have or are diagnosed with PTSD that have been, a lot of the soldiers that are coming back from war, that's something that's hard to detach from. And so you keep reliving that same thing over and over. People who are victims of rape, that's a difficult thing to detach from. And so you keep reliving that over and over. And so that's really what PTSD is about, is when you get diagnosed with that, it is because you've had these traumatic experiences that you keep reliving.
Okay. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because a lot of times when you do hear or see in the media anything about PTSD, then it normally is associated with soldiers at war or first responders. But there's a lot of women out there who suffer from PTSD because of, situations and things that they've gone through in their past and abuse and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to bring that up to kind of normalize the conversation about that too, because I think there's a whole segment of people out there who may be suffering from PTSD, but they think, well, I'm not a soldier, I've not been at war, so that can't be the problem. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there so that we can understand that there's some correlation of situations that people have gone through other than being in a war or first responder that could show up as PTSD. So that's another conversation, Dr. Tanya, but I just wanted to...
Yeah, but definitely there's a definite connection. If you've been in a long-term abusive relationship, then you absolutely could be suffering from PTSD for sure. If you live in an extremely violent community where, there's constant murders, and those kinds of things going on, or robberies, and you, again, PTSD, because you're constantly thinking about those things in the back of your mind. You're constantly anxious, and skittish that something may happen to you.
Right.
Then, so community violence, there are a lot of people who live in communities that are extremely violent who are, living with PTSD.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So what are some of the warning signs that you look for when you're talking with your clients about this?
Okay. So again, it goes back to I think the easiest thing that I always think about is it's really about sort of how you respond to things. So one of the things I look for is an extreme response to what we might consider a more typical situation. So, again, your coworkers are, say something rude to you, or they're getting on your nerves or whatever, and you keep quitting jobs because, these things keep happening. Okay, that's kind of an extreme response,
right? Because
we all need to work, we all need to have a job, and so it says that there's, a lack of coping skills there, because we know in every job we've had, there's probably some coworker that we don't get along with very well. But that doesn't make everybody run off and quit the job, because you don't get along with that coworker. So you have coping skills to be able to deal with that. So that's really one of the first, signs for me, is that, when the person is talking to me about their life and sort of how they're going through life, I look for, are they really having these extreme responses to what could be a common, type of situation. Okay. And then the other thing that I look for is, are you sort of responding to situations that come up in life the same way? Do you have like the same type of a response to most things that happen to you? So an example of this, because again, sometimes when we talk about trauma and things like that, we always want to talk about the person that is outwardly aggressive. But trauma can manifest itself in a sense of withdrawal too.
Okay.
And so, sometimes I look at, when they're confronted by, some situation, do they withdraw? Do they tend to disconnect from people and want to go off and be, by themselves, those kinds of things? That can be an indication that that person has had some past traumas in their lives. And that's their way of coping with it, is to just disconnect, is to withdraw. And that way, it puts them, they think they're putting themselves in a safer space because they're disconnecting and withdrawing from, from the world and from people around them. Okay. So those are a couple. So if you tend to respond, again, to things in an extreme kind of way, or you tend to have a kind of one size fits all response to things, where it's like, no matter if somebody is aggressive towards you, you withdraw. If somebody, wants to get too close to you, you withdraw. If withdrawing is just your answer, to everything, and you have that kind of one size fits all response, that could be an indication as well. One of the easiest things that you can do is there's a list of that list of like 50 traumatic experiences and events that I have. Sometimes it's as simple as just letting people see that list and just asking people, because again, a lot of what I do is on the educational side. And so it's like teaching you what trauma is. And then it's like, you look at this list and you just see, do you recall any of these things happening to you? How many of these things? Circle, the number of these things that have happened to you. And then that can kind of start to move you in a direction of saying, wow, out of these 50 things, just like you said, there's 5 or 6 of these things that I've experienced, or I experienced 5 or 6 of these things in a row. Right. And so then that starts to open you up to being a little bit more self-reflective just about, again, what you've experienced. And then the next step is, okay, so how are those things impacting you? Okay. Because they always have some sort of effect on you. And so then the question is, yes, we've experienced these things, but how have they, impacted us? Sometimes we have enough resilience where we can move on from that thing. And we really have, done some work on it. We've processed it and we've been able to move on from it. And then there may be some of those other things where we weren't as able to be able to move on from them.
Okay. All right, good. So now, is there anything that we can do to heal ourselves from past trauma?
Definitely so. Again, I think that first thing is that self-reflection piece of, just being honest with yourself first about what you have experienced. I think that that's where it starts for most people. Again, the second piece of that self-reflection is knowing what your triggers are, knowing the things that trigger you, because that's going to help tremendously. If you know that you tend to get really angry or overly angry about things, if you see it in road rage, you see it in, cutting people off or wanting to chase people down and things like that. I've worked with people where sometimes, again, it's like, it's not always what they say to me, but it's, I worked with a client once where she was like, it's how they say it. Right. They say things to me in a certain way. Another person could say the exact same thing, and she would be okay with it, but because of how people, and so it's like, what is it about, how that person says it that really triggers you? Because you got to figure it out, because you can't change how other people are always going to talk to you, but you can change your response to that. Right. And so the work is in you figuring out, what is it about, how that person says that triggers me. And then you either have to make a couple of decisions, because again, it's not about changing that other person, but it's about you saying, okay, do I just need to spend less time around this person because of the way they talk to me that, tends to trigger me? Or do I need to have a conversation with this person about how they talk to me and how I'm perceiving what it is that they're saying to me? Right. So again, it's knowing those things, that trigger you, so that then you can make decisions about, can you change it, or can you avoid it? You know, can you change your thinking about it? So those are usually the three ways with a trigger, is that you either can change, you know, that trigger itself, remove it in some kind of way. If it can't be removed, can you avoid it in some kind of a way? And then if avoidance, you know, isn't an option either, then can you change? If you have to be, you know, in that environment with whatever that is that's triggering you, then can you change your way of thinking about, you know, that particular thing? So that's the main thing. And then the second thing is what I always say is developing those coping skills, and developing, because again, we can't eliminate everything. And so it's developing healthy coping and social and emotional skills that's going to allow us to be able to deal with the challenges, you know, that we face in life. So I think so much of this goes, you know, to that, because, you know, one of the things with therapy, and I think why people shy away from it sometimes, is that it's like, I can't go back and change the past. I can't go back and change, and you can't. You absolutely can't go back and change the past. But what you can do is give yourself some specific skills in being able to deal with those things that have happened to you in the past.
Right. And I like that you said that too, because, you know, as a person who's gone to therapy for a while, you know, it's not about changing what happened in the past, but it's sometimes about acknowledging what happened in the past. And like you said, learning ways to deal with it, because you can't live a healthy life if you continue to kind of suppress all of the things that happen and run away from them and don't deal with them. Because like in my situation, they will come up and they will hit you hard.
Definitely.
You know?
Definitely.
Yeah. And then you find yourself in a situation like, oh my gosh, I should have dealt with this a long time ago. But the reality is that, you know, a lot of people just don't know. Like this is not information that, you know, we get from anywhere. You know, this is, for me, I have this information because I've gone through it. And once I started to go through it, I'm like, okay, I need to understand. I'm a learning person and I like to do research. So I started to like read more about it and research, because I want to understand what this thing is and why I'm going through it. But this is not information that is made readily available to us, you know. And so my purpose in having this conversation with you is to try to help some people kind of recognize that, okay, there may be something, you know, this isn't just, you know, just a thing that I'm going through, but this is something that I can acknowledge, I can work on, I can go get some help with. And basically, I don't have to live this way. I can make changes so that I don't have to live this way. We don't have to live, you know, stressed out of control, angry, mad all the time. We don't have to live that way. And so that's why I think it's really important to have these kinds of conversations.
Definitely so. And there are, you know, strategies if these things that have happened to you in your life, if they manifest themselves by you being overly angry about things, then there are specific strategies that you can use to be able to manage that anger. Because we all get angry about things, but it's all about what you do with that anger. If it, you know, manifests itself as anxiety and it makes you really anxious about things and really, you know, constantly worrying about things, then there are specific strategies and tools that you can use to be able to calm your mind and manage that level of anxiety, you know, that you may have. The same thing with disconnecting, you know, from people, if that's how it manifests itself. So, you know, again, it's all about, you know, really us seeking and sharing those tools and strategies, whether it's journaling, whether it's, you know, learning specific breathing techniques, whether it is, you know, going through specific activities around, you know, learning how to regulate your emotions and control certain emotions that you have, joining a peer support group so that you know that, one, you're not in it by yourself. You're not the only one. Because sometimes just the mere knowing and having a safe space where you can actually talk about this stuff and hear other people's stories sometimes can be very, you know, helpful and cathartic to you, just because, you know, wow, I'm not the only one who thinks this way about this. I'm not the only one who has experienced this.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And this is our very big, giant, open peer support group.
Absolutely. And I'm all about the virtual ones because I think that they can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And you can create that safe space online, really.
Yeah.
To where, any of the ladies who are listening, even if you do it, I'm considering doing some Zoom online stress management groups to where we can all still see each other, but we're all, talking and kind of sharing about, the things, the challenges that we have in life and sort of how we're managing those things and being able to share, tools and strategies. So yeah, I think the online space is beautiful for this because so many people don't want to go sit in a room with a bunch of people face to face. They just aren't going to do it, but they can do something like this for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, good stuff. So we're on the right track. Yay.
We are for sure.
All right. So you mentioned a couple resources. So we're going to wrap it up here, but you mentioned a couple resources. Are there any resources available to help us if we find ourselves in this situation? What are some of the things we can do?
So again, there are, lots of resources if, I would say, Google is kind of your best friend between that and YouTube in some ways.
Yeah.
That, if you are, I would say first to do some writing, do some journaling, do some self-reflection. And one of the things that I can do is to share some exercises on self-reflection that people can put up so we can figure out like where we want to put these up so that people can access them. Okay. Because it really starts, with that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, after you do that self-reflection, then because it takes that to kind of start to figure out what is my trigger, what am I, how am I responding to this to know whether it is that you need tools on anger management, you need tools on anxiety, and worry, you need tools on fear, because some of this, these things can make you very fearful and it paralyzes you and keeps you from moving. And people say, I want to do all these things, but I just can't, find the will to do them. Yeah. Sometimes again, it's those past events that will keep you up and keep you from being able to move forward and do the things you want to do in life. Yeah. On the therapy side, because we have talked so much about just trauma itself, I actually found a great resource today, and I wrote it down so that I wouldn't forget. Okay. It's a site that's a portal for Black therapists. So it's called therapyforblackgirls.com. And I know I totally love the site.
I love that.
Yes, because I was like, now that is so specific. And so I think it's Dr. Joy who started it. But it's pretty much a portal, so you can go in, look up your state. And from what I saw just from looking at it today, and the reason why it came into sort of my field of view was because I was looking at some things with the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. And one of the things with that is that, you have so many people who are now finding the courage to step forward and to say, I've experienced these things. And so when people have the courage to do that, you don't want to just leave them hanging. Sure. If therapy is the direction that they want to go, sometimes, people always say, well, I can't find somebody that looks like me. I can't find somebody that I can really connect with. Right. And so, this whole portal was built just for that reason. So I think that that's a good resource if you want to connect with a therapist. If you want more of a support group and the educational exercises and those kinds of things, then you can also check out, my website, askdrtanya.com. Okay. And like I said, I'll get with you and we can figure out a way to get up some of these exercises and things like that. Because I think a lot of the tools that we use in educational psychology can be really helpful for helping people to start themselves on that path of figuring out, some strategies and some tools and things that they can use.
Okay, awesome. And so now you just mentioned the website, but what are some other ways that if there's any ladies listening and they want to reach out to you, if they have questions or need some resources, how can they reach you?
Mm-hmm. They can reach me through email if they want to send a personal email. So it's a similar email. It's askdrtanya@gmail.com. so they can reach me that way. I'll even give my phone number. I don't have a problem with giving out my phone number. Okay. So my phone number is 443-768-4108. Okay. So you can send me a call, you get text message. I do all of it. And the thing with me is if I, after having a conversation with you, and this is one of the things I want to make sure I leave the ladies with, is after having a conversation with you, if I feel like I specifically can't help you with what you have going on, I will definitely guide you to someone who can. Okay. And so not that, a lot of times people will say, I called somebody and they just said, oh, I can't help you. And then that was it. Yeah. One of my biggest goals is to be a resource to people. Yeah. And so, like I said, if I don't feel like, what I do is a fit for you, then I definitely will, make referrals and things like that to try to point you in the direction and to directly connect you with someone who can assist you with it.
Yeah, because I know that happens a lot of times and people will get discouraged if, yes. It takes a lot to get up the courage to even call Dr. Tanya, but exactly, then, it does. Right. And then if she can't help you and be like, oh, I can't help you, then it's like, some people get deflated. I know I've personally done that in the past and let that be an obstacle. So I'm glad that you, are open enough to be able to say, hey, this isn't kind of what I do, but let me give you some help or point you in the right direction.
Absolutely. I think that we all have to do that because I experienced that same thing when the first time I looked for a therapist. And I remember that first phone call and she's like, no, I'm booked up. And I was like, oh, okay, well, and it took me a week to make the phone call. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, she's booked up. Now and so I had to start all over and I didn't quit. But the thing was, I know that some people might. And so, just know that, again, I think for, you and I both, we seek to be resources, to the women in our community. So like I said, if I don't know, I know some people who do know. Okay. We'll get you connected with somebody who can help for sure.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you once again. I'm so thankful that you take out your time to get on this podcast with me. So blessed to have you to be a part of the movement to just try to bring this good information to women. I know there's so many women out there that could use the help and they don't know what direction to turn in, but hopefully we can be, a blessing and be able to help people and be a resource and point them in the right direction and help them, with some of their baggage. I'm using the air quotes. Right. So, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Tanya. I really appreciate you.
Well, you are welcome. I'm always excited to come and serve the women in your community.
Thank you so much. So we'll be speaking soon. I'm sure I'll come up with some other topic that you can help me with. So there'll be a part 3 probably.
Please do. I'm thinking about some things myself. So we'll have to talk offline to see what else we can get into together.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care. Okay, ladies, you have just reached the end of another episode of Grown and Sexy Sistahs Talk. This was real conversation for real women about real life. I really hope you enjoyed our talk, and I have a little homework for you. First, I want you to go to my website, www.grownansexysistah.com to sign up for my newsletter. On there, you can also read my blog, find valuable free resources, schedule a coaching session, or just check out some upcoming events. Second, I want you to subscribe to my podcast. You can do it on iTunes or Google Play. You don't want to miss out on one single episode, so that's going to be really important. And third, check me out on YouTube. You can type in Grown and Sexy Sistah with an AH in the search bar and make sure to subscribe there as well. I want you to be able to see the amazing video recordings of these podcasts there. So much love, be blessed, stay grown and sexy, sisters, and we'll speak soon.